Okay, so Apple just put out its list of the 100 best albums of all time. As you can imagine, there has been a lot of debate over the list. I actually do think this list is worth defending. I may be alone on that one. The group chat is here. They have a lot of thoughts on this, so let's go. I'm Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion. We're here to talk about the thing that everyone you know has been talking about, right? Like Apple Music said, hey, these are the 100 best albums of all time. And my feed has just kind of been flooded with some questions. Questions like, how did Billie Eilish make this list? How is Drake higher on the list than John Coltrane? Why is there only one Taylor Swift album? Admittedly, that was my question. That was a me question. I'm still wondering that question. Here to talk about all of this, Niko Stratis is here. Suzy Exposito is here. Dalton Higgins is here. Niko, Suzy, and Dalton. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
All right, listen, let's just dive in, and we're going to kick off the conversation with the greatest album of all time. Come on, Lauryn Hill, doo-wop that thing from the 1998 debut solo album, the only solo album, the only album we've ever gotten from Lauryn Hill, the miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Apple put this album in the very top spot. They said, this is the best album of all time. They assembled this group of artists, group of experts, people like Pharrell and Charlie XCX and Maren Morris, and noted musical expert Blink-182's Mark Hoppus, who would not make my list of people to consult in terms of making the greatest albums of all time, but that's neither here nor there. Naturally, I think people have a lot of opinions on this list. Dalton, I'm going to start with you. When you hear that Apple put the miseducation of Lauryn Hill at the very top, what do you make of that decision? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm not mad at that decision at all. I mean, you know, the album, you know, when you listen to it, it has like no fast forward material. You know what I mean? Like, which is, it's not something you can say about, you know, 90% of albums that have come out in the last 40, 50 years, you know? You know, and I think what makes this particular album so magical is that, you know, it appeals to music listeners across generations, right?
Yeah.
So my baby boomer counterparts, you know, Gen Now, Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, all love the album, you know, and it also appeals to, you know, across music genres as well, which is almost next to near impossible to pull off. Now here's the thing with Lauryn. I mean, she's a rapper, she's an R&B and soul singer. Yeah. So, you know, for hip hop and R&B enthusiasts, the album hits hard, like it's off the charts, you know. Yeah. But it also hits hard for people that are into like mainstream pop audiences, right? Yeah. So it's just one of those rare, like unicorn outlier albums, you know, that is deserving of the #1 spot.
Listen, we played doo-wop that thing, and I understand why we played that song. One of the songs that I really wanted to play was Lost Ones. And like, if you listen to doo-wop and Lost Ones and you go like, these are on the same album, this album covers genres, covers a span of like sort of like different types of music making that all coexist so beautifully in there. Niko, what do you make of the idea that Lauryn Hill should occupy the top spot? Again, best album of all time, according to Apple Music.
I mean, it's the best album of all time. It was, you know, when this came out, I always loved my opportunity to flex of I was a teenager in the 1990s. Just to remind everybody that I'm in fact very, very old. But like, you know, when this came out, you know, it is like this very clear memory of everybody at work. We're stealing cheese buns from the bakery at the grocery store we work at. We're hiding in the alley out back. We're smoking cigarettes. Somebody's got the door open to their car and we're blasting that record. Like, this album didn't leave anybody's stereo for maybe ever. Like, there's probably cars in a lot somewhere that still have that CD in the dash somewhere. And it just like, it was right at this moment when like hip hop is starting to climb charts and become this bigger thing. You know, pop music is being taken more seriously. And it's like Dalton was saying, it's this crossover. It has all of these avenues into genres that are all starting to make themselves known in like to broader audiences, to pop audiences, to radio listeners, to all of these things. And it kind of happened at the perfect time. And when you put that on now, like putting doo-wop on right now, you're still like, yes, this song is incredible. Like it does never go away. People still do it at karaoke. Like if people are doing it in karaoke in 2024, your album's a certified hit and everybody should be celebrating it.
Well, I was going to say, like, Suzy, like, to me, all these lists, when they're made, they are very much a product of their time. They're a product of the reflection of the moment. Why do you think Lauryn Hill's Miseducation of Lauryn Hill makes sense right now as the best album of all time?
I mean, it was a super formative album, like not just for me, but for so many people so many artists over the years who I've interviewed have all cited this album as influential, whether they make music in English or Spanish or French. And so if you did this list 10 years ago, it probably would have been the Beatles at the top. But over the past 10 years, there's been a huge evolution in the diversity of music critics and people who engage in music. So this choice did not surprise me.
Yeah, the Beatles have fallen to the lowly number of number 3. Okay, I just want to give people the the top 10 real quick. So Lauren's number 1, Michael Jackson, Thriller, number 2, Beatles, Abbey Road at number 3, Prince, Purple Rain at 4, Frank Ocean, really big surprise to me, that ends up at Blonde at number 5, Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life at number 6, Kendrick Lamar, Good Kid, Mad City, number 7, and then Amy Winehouse, Back to Black at number 8, Nirvana with Nevermind at 9, and then at number 10, Beyonce with Lemonade. Dalton, when we say that a list is a reflection of its moment, what we're really saying here is like they are making a new canon, right? Like they're saying like for you to exist as a music fan and a music listener in 2024, these are the songs that shaped how you got here to this moment. What do you think this list tells us about how the canon of popular music is shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if a singular list, like it's a list put out by a corporate streaming service, okay? Like that, it's not, it wasn't.
Oh, here comes the skepticism. Go on, Dalton.
No, you know what I mean? Let's be real. So it's Apple Music. And so I don't know if Apple Music can define what the music canon is, but what I can say is that these lists do create like a ton of discussion and dialogue about the canon. And so I think Apple Music, they hit the mark there. Now, as far as the canon, the new canon versus the old canon, I mean, you'll notice that this list includes a lot of great albums coming out of the hip hop tradition, coming out of the so-called urban music tradition. And I think that's really smart because, let's be real, rap music has been the most dominant music form over the last, arguably 10 to 15, 20 years. That's not open to debate, right? So to me, this list, I mean, it doesn't feel dated or driven by, the typical sort of out of touch baby boomer, stuck in the 70s kind of thing, which typically happens when lists are put together, where they're so like rock and roll heavy, folk heavy, country, like country music heavy. Many lists are. So this list just feels to me like it's just more tapped into what's happening in the here and now. It's more modern, it's more contemporary, and it has more of its like finger on the pulse,
Okay, can I just play you guys this clip right here?
Why don't you giddy up, giddy up? Ride straight out of this town. You
That's Casey Musgraves. That's High Horse. This is the only country music album on the list. Casey Musgraves from 2019. That's unbelievable to me, Niko. The notion that you would make this list, and I understand that like maybe country is not as foundational to the canon in this particular moment, but the notion that Casey would have the only entry, and number 85, I should say, there's no Dolly Parton on this list. There's no Willie Nelson on this list. These are people that you would expect to be in any other top 10 list anywhere else. So when you see that there's no country, and you see that people are reacting to this list and taking it seriously, does that surprise you at all in any kind of way, Niko?
I mean, it does, because inevitably with a list like this, people are always going to notice what's not there. And also like there's this whole dialogue and discussion about canon and what is the canon. And, a lot of the reaction to this I've noticed is a lot of people that tend to be the voices involved in lists like this. And I think a lot of it sometimes is like, well, I'm no longer reflected in this. And like my feeling and opinion on it is kind of shifting over time as I think more about it. And like to some degree, it makes sense to only have this one country record, which is you could argue is much more of a pop record.
Yeah.
Because it's more indicative of where we are right now. What's the top 100 right now? This list isn't, set in stone to be forever. This is a list just for right now. And maybe this is the most indicative thing of right now. Maybe that's okay. There's not a lot of there's no like Otis Redding on there. There's no Al Green on there. There's no punk rock at all. There's a lot of stuff is missing from this list. And we could argue all day is what's not there. But I think it's interesting to see what is there. How is it different? And who's making these decisions and why? Like you said earlier that, you were surprised that like Mark Hoppus is a voice on this. He's an Apple Music host, but also Mark Hoppus is a pop guy. Like if you listen to Blink 182, he's a man that understands pop song structure and really gets pop music in a way that I think he sometimes get like looked over for. And I think you look at this list, like this is an understanding that pop music is such a dominant thing for people, especially for younger people who are making a new canon for themselves.
Okay, I want to play another album that did make the Apple Music 100 list. Let's play that. That is Bad Bunny. The album is Un Verano Sin Ti. Listen, it's the number 76 entry into this list, Suzy. It is also the only non-English album to make the Apple 100 Best list. Does that surprise you in any way? Do you kind of look at that and go, what were they thinking?
It's not surprising. It's really just par for the course for a list made in the United States. It's clear that the people who voted were predominantly not Latino at all. I was actually part of the revived Rolling Stone 500 albums list a few years ago, and I made it so that we invited more people in the Latin music industry to vote. But I also made my own ballot, very heavy on Spanish language music. I mean, I've been listening to it since I was born, so of course that helps, I guess. Yeah. But I did that so that some albums could get a chance, like Daddy Yankee, like Selena. People pay a lot of lip service to Latin music, but to me, it just looks like Apple did not have the most diverse voting pool.
Dalton, what do you make of the lack of representation of non-English speaking albums on this list?
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, I mean, the industry is so incredibly slow, when it comes to sort of has a lot of catching up to do, let's just say, when it comes to, what people are actually streaming and listening to. So I think just the mere fact that we're talking about adding jurors that might be, continental African, right? Because Afrobeats is like, through the roof, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Reggaeton, we're just having conversations now, but outside of the West, outside of North America, I mean, let's be real. So the industry is what I think I have a bit of an issue with, and some of the constitution of these juries. I mean, look at the Grammy Awards. They just added a Best African Music Performance category this year. You know what I mean? But if you're in that scene, you're like, it's outselling and outperforming all of these fringe music genres that have this big representation, right? So, it's like, make it make sense,
I mean, like, my take on this is that, like, these lists are supposed to be living lists. And I think, like, there is a moment of arrival that feels like it's like a heavy sort of moment of arrival, and it always will. When Rolling Stone puts out its 500 greatest albums of all time list, people go, okay, now we get to argue about this. But then when they update it, 20 years later, and you see some albums have moved up, some albums have moved down, it gives you the sense that, like, actually we're meant to engage with the change. Like, the idea that we have changed as a society, and therefore this list has changed us in this many ways, and it's a reflection of how the sort of general terrain of music has changed. To me, that's the comfort, but I don't know if you're drawing any comfort from that at all, Dalton. Like, do you kind of go, no, actually, even in this moment, you could have done better than this?
Yeah, the change it's too slow. It's glacial. But again, we have, in the Western world, it's very sort of ethnocentric, kind of our view, our position, our frame of reference, super Western. But just travel outside of our borders and people are thinking quite the opposite of what we're thinking oftentimes, so.
Okay. I want us to get a little bit messy in this section of the conversation. So we're talking about the 100 best albums that Apple just put out. And I want us to get messy in the sense of, like, we're going to talk about the entries or rankings on this list that make you go, what the heck were they thinking? Suzy, start us off. What the heck were they thinking? What comes to mind?
I just don't know what was going on here. I'm curious about who voted. I'm curious about who wrote the descriptions for the albums.
Okay.
I don't. Like,
is there an entry that makes you think that? Is there a particular
an entry in particular?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I just think, like, you know, it's not good for music journalism that there's no bylines on any of the writing for Apple Music.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a commercial, like it's a streaming service, but I just like Apple Music is not known for having like a critical voice. So I don't really know why, you know, what the metrics were. I mean, they explain, you know, it had to have been impactful, but I would have liked a little more explanation.
A little more information.
And text.
Yeah. The criteria would help us a lot in terms of understanding how they made some of these choices. How Taylor Swift's 1989, for example, is 2 spots ahead of Pet Sounds, the Beach Boys, which is like, I think like that's a legitimate question to ask. Niko, are there any entries here where you go, what the heck were they thinking? What the heck were they thinking? Billie Eilish at number 30 for her debut record, which is only like from 2019 or so.
Yeah, some of it definitely does feel like we need to put this somewhere. Where can we put it? It's like when you're building a puzzle and you're giving up at the exact same time. It's like, well, we're going to put stuff here and it's not going to make sense and it's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like at the end of the day, we're going to walk away from this list and forget where everything was placed. We're going to remember the stuff that was there that we talked about. We're going to remember that Purple Rain is number 4, which is a great decision.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we don't see Prince often enough on these lists. And it was really nice. That was like one of those moments where you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting. That's when I knew the number 1 was going to surprise me. Was seeing that at number 4. Because that's not a thing you see a lot, right? Like we talk a lot about a lot of these people as icons and as members, but then we still put the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in the top 10. And like, you know, they don't need to be there. They're fine. They got their moment. You know, like the Taylor Swift thing was surprising, but it was always going to be surprising. Anywhere you put her, there's going to be an argument, right? Like, why does she deserve to be above, you know, Robin, who was in the 100 spot, which like I would have maybe bumped that up a little bit too, just because that Robin record was so huge. And just like, I can make my own list and I would have arguments, but I think the most important thing is like, have an argument, have an opinion, have a feeling on it, have a reaction to it. I think people having a reaction to it is kind of a beautiful thing because it reminds us we can still react to these things.
Dalton, what about you? Was there a particular entry that make you go, what? Why is this here? This, or like my favorite argument has been like, this is the wrong album. Right artist, but you've chosen the wrong album from this artist.
Yeah, totally. I mean, with Kendrick Lamar, you know, Good Kid, Mad City.
At number 7 or 8, right? Like pretty high.
Yeah, it's like number 7. Yeah. So, you know, that it's the highest rated rap record on the list. And that's nuts, right? As that's not even his best album, right? I think To Pimp a Butterfly, I think personally is a better album. We can definitely debate that. And Good Kid, Mad City 2, you know, it's obviously not the best rap album of all time, but it's a top rated album on the list. Like so
higher than the Blueprint, which is pretty wild, but
Yeah, exactly, right? So if you look at the list, the top 100, there's like at least, you know, good 14, 15 rap albums on the list that are better than Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City. You know what I mean? Like Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory, Nas's Illmatic, Biggie. Like, so I don't know about that as far as how they positioned Good Kid, Mad City, Kendrick Lamar, number 7. Like, I don't know.
Were there any other standouts in terms of like, oh, you kind of maybe messed up the ranking on this one, or that's one of the surprises for you?
Yeah, for me. Well, do you have a couple hours? I mean, I think there's. Again, I would have flip-flopped a lot of, you know, the Wu-Tang Clan, Enter the 36 Chambers, move that up a bit. Maybe move, you know what I mean? Like, it's a
controversial take from me. I think Kanye was too low. I think like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy at 25 or 26 was a surprisingly low number for the way that album sort of, I think, changed the culture. I also just want to play you guys a little bit of this right now.
Cause she was seeing red, and all I saw was you. It happened in the flash when she charged at me, y'all crisscross. Saw her fall to the floor, then you paused, and in horror, that shot wasn't for her. Was it?
That is SZA. That is Kill Bill. This, Suzy, is the most recent album released to make this list. It's an album from 2022, slightly more recent than Bad Bunny's album. And this is like the most recent album to make the 100 best albums of all time. That's pretty stunning when you consider the idea that your album's been out for what, like 2 years at this point, not even 2 years, a year and a half at this point, and it already has earned a spot in the greatest albums of all time. When you saw SZA on this list, when you saw SOS on this list, did that surprise you in any way?
It wasn't ranked high enough for me.
Oh,
you know, I personally, I love this album. It's a combination. It's like, it's a very confessional, like pop album at its core, you know? And I loved SOS.
Niko, do you want to talk about any glaring omissions for you? Because you sort of mentioned there's very little punk presence. There's like one metal album, I think. They were like, we've heard of Metallica. They will be on this list. Any glaring omissions for you as you sort of look over this list?
I mean, we could have had more, like we were saying earlier, you know, like a lot of this stuff is the product of the building blocks of things that came before, and some of those blocks are missing, right? Like, I think there's a lot of stuff that is unrepresented there. And we can make that argument all day, right? Like, I think once we allow ourselves to say like, well, this should have been there, then you're inviting everybody in. Like, there should have been more country, there should have been more soul, there should have been more R&B, there should have been a lot more of like foundational texts, but also it is very much like, and, you know, if you're putting a record that came out 2 years ago on the list, you're sort of talking a little bit recency bias. And maybe that's okay. Like, this is a thing, like I said, I'm slowly adjusting over time, and like, maybe it's fine that there's not a lot of older stuff on there. Maybe we can actually get past putting all those things and say, well, what are the new building blocks? What are our new foundations? And maybe that's what this is. And maybe we can know that those things are built off of something that came before. And like, I can argue all day that my favorite record should be there, but at the end of the day, I'm just going to go offline, touch some grass, and play that record. You know what I'm like? It's not gonna, like, I'm gonna lose less sleep over it.
Niko with a touch grass recommendation. Wow. I can't believe this came from you.
That's how I'm living this Friday morning is let's touch some grass and listen to Dolly Parton or whatever you want to do.
No, that's wise. That's totally wise. Dalton, before we just move on from this, last question to you. Streaming, I think, has seriously diminished the stature of the album in our culture. And then, you know, like we get a lot of people making playlists, etc. And then you get this moment where Apple, one of the streaming services, says, actually, we want to return the album to its grand stature. Do you buy it? Do you buy this maneuver from Apple as a way to say, you know what, albums matter, even though we're part of the ecosystem that maybe has diminished the significance of the concept of the album?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think their PR strategists, publicists are working overtime. That's a bit of a stretch. Like that's a total spin. I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's a singles-driven marketplace. Few people are listening to full length. You know what I mean? Like listening to full, 16, 14 track albums. I don't believe that's happening. What I do think is I use this sort of Drake versus Kendrick Lamar kind of analogy. Drake on the one hand, he's kind of singles-driven. Will we be listening to Drake 30, 40, 50 years from now? Right. I'm not entirely convinced, you know what I mean? And I teach a course about Drake, at the university. Kendrick Lamar, on the other hand, his work is being studied at Harvard University, Ivy Leagues. He won a Pulitzer Prize, He did. The two artists are apples and oranges, So I think when it comes to this idea of, albums and, what's going to, stand the test of time, be thinking about 50 years from now, a lot of the albums on this top 100 list, when we talk about stuff, baby boomer attached 80s, 90s, early aughts, they are albums, right? So I think it was important for Apple Music to get people thinking about, to get those the streams happening for those albums that are going to, the Prince, the Michael Jacksons, this type of thing.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to leave it. I appreciate your energy and your time and your passion about all of this. People will continue to fight about this off the air, so I really appreciate you guys being willing to do it right on here. Suzy Exposito, Niko Stratis, Dalton Higgins, you guys are the best. Thanks for your time again.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Suzy Exposito is a music journalist in Los Angeles. Niko Stratis is a culture writer based in Toronto. Dalton Higgins is a journalist and professor in residence at Toronto Metropolitan University. Listen, that's it for the show today. I just want to tell you before we go that there are 4 Canadian artists on this list. Joni Mitchell is on this list. I know Alanis Morissette is on this list. Neil Young is on this list. And, of course, Drake. And I'm really fascinated by the number of Canadians who turned up on this list because I think there should have been more. I'm really surprised that Alanis was not ranked higher. She was at 31. But anyway, this is the kind of thing that this list tends to engender, is this exact kind of fighting. That is it for the podcast. I want to tell you that Commotion was produced this week by Stuart Berman, Ty Callender, Ryan Chung, Jane Vancouverden, and Jess Lowe. Our digital producers are Carla Antonio, Amelia Ekbal, Shuli Grossman-Gray, and Shell Turningen. Our director is Danielle Grogan. Our engineer is Sam Hashmi. Our senior producer is John Perry. And McKeegan is our executive producer. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. What I want you to do is go find that list and then find the one that you disagree with most and then send it to me on Instagram. Would you do that? We are at Commotion CBC. Have a great day.